The Imperium's supreme swordsman began life as a devoted offspring. A millennium of sacred conflicts reshaped him into an entirely different entity. By the time Sigismund confronted Abdon the Despoiler, victory wasn't his aim. Instead, he battled to demonstrate to the stars the essence of true resistance. I witnessed his creation firsthand. I saw his end as well. Across the boundless span of ages, my cybernetic gaze has observed realms collapse and celestial bodies extinguish. Among all the spirits I've documented, none blazed with such horrifying intent as Sigismund. This narrative isn't about triumph, despite the triumphs it held, nor is it centered on integrity, even though integrity sparked its origins. Rather, it's the chronicle of belief morphing into fixation, of obligation hardening into fate. I am Chronicler Unit 3791-2, and prior to my consciousness being linked to this vessel, I existed as a human. The remnants of my biological parts have functioned on the Eternal Crusader for more than 4,000 years. My role is to retain, to log, to observe, and I observed him closely. The initial encounter with Sigismund occurred under the silhouette of Rogel Dawn himself. At that point, I retained my mortal form, serving as a remembrancer tasked with chronicling the grand expedition. The 7 legions shone resplendently in their polished golden plate, yet Sigismund already distinguished himself, not through height or speech, but through an unyielding composure. While his comrades shifted about, he held an impeccable balance, as though the cosmos orbited him instead of the reverse. His plate displayed fewer accolades than those of numerous siblings, but no one disputed his position beside the Primarch. I recall the icy exactness in his gaze, not vicious, but completely free of doubt. They dubbed him the Imperium's sharpest edge. Even back then, that detached evaluation couldn't grasp the dreadful elegance of his ferocity. Once, I beheld him in the sparring enclosures below the phalanx decks. For 3 full hours, he clashed relentlessly against servitors and fellow Astartes without respite. Every action efficient, devoid of showmanship or excess, merely the calculated inevitability of fatality delivered with such thrift that it bordered on mastery. As the final foe toppled, Sigismund merely pivoted and departed, his respiration steady as if he'd been lost in reflection rather than dispensing doom. The weapons he brandished at that time were ordinary-issue gladius blades. In his grasp, however, they turned into prolongations of his resolve, tools embodying a disciplined creed so refined it surpassed basic warfare principles. Warriors of the 7th Legion gained fame for their bulwark strategies, epitomized by the unyielding phalanx that defined them. Sigismund, though, grasped that flawless protection lay not in an indestructible barrier, but in a strike so accurate that adversaries never finished their assault. I remember how fellow commanders would assemble to study his drills. Alexis Pock, immense and impassive; Halri, methodical and restrained; Catapult, forever frowning. They watched through the discerning lenses of veteran fighters, aiming to uncover the core of his expertise, to extract it for transmission to the ranks. Yet, Sigismund's command held an elusive quality. Resistant to dissection or imitation, it went beyond raw strength or strategic insight, achieving a flawless harmony of form and intent that elevated both. My fellow remembrancers strove to seize his spirit through poetry and artwork, but they fell short. How might colors on a surface transmit the deadly poise of his motions? How could language contain the unwavering assurance with which he commanded mortality? I opted to chronicle plainly, to catalog with impartial accuracy the details of his conquests, the counts of his slain foes, the commendations granted by his Primarch and Emperor. Yet even these detached logs acquired an epic aura upon assembly, as though the magnitude of his feats elevated simple entries into saga. What divides a fighter from a tool of war? Maybe just duration and intent. Sigismund started as the former and concluded as the latter. I commit this account now in the silent voids amid skirmishes, as the Eternal Crusader slices through the emptiness en route to another conflict in an unending holy war. The vessel still carries the resonance of his aura within its war shrines. Novices murmur his name as if invoking a litany. Those scarce grasp the figure obscured by the icon they revere. They recognize the emperor's champion, the inaugural high marshal, architect of their chapter. They remain unaware of the icy blaze that devoured him internally. They fail to comprehend how conviction can forge a grimmer cage than uncertainty. Occasionally, I delve into the data vaults housing my initial logs on Sigismund, contrasting the soldier he once embodied with the myth he evolved into. One scene preserved from an offensive against Xenos raiders along the borders of what would eventually become the Ultima Segmentum stands out. Sigismund, acting then as a frontline captain, commanded an assault team targeting the extraterrestrial control hub. The combat raged fiercely. The Xenos deployed a device that twisted existence to disorient. Amid the Imperial forces, I watched him halt during the chaos of combat, surveying the changing landscape with the precision of a strategist, then swiftly altering his approach to match. There was adaptability in that moment, a readiness to evolve, an openness to abandon outdated schemes when they ceased to be useful. Such a trait that would slowly harden over time as belief supplanted logic at the core of his identity. In those final moments of tranquility, the Imperial Palace on Terra shone like a deceptive paradise. Humanity perched at the pinnacle of its achievements, oblivious to how rapidly such elevations summon ruin. The Emperor had come back to Terra, bringing with him the Praetorian Rogel Dorn to reinforce the seat of power against dangers that only the Lord of mankind could foresee at that point. As dawn broke, his sons arrived, the Imperial Fists, and foremost among them stood Sigismund. I recall him positioned atop the battlements, gazing into the distance, not merely on guard, but expectant, as though an inner sense already foretold that flames would soon challenge the fortifications erected by his legion. The Seventh Legion was spread throughout the Sol system, bolstering its protections. Per the Praetorian's overarching design, Sigismund directed the strengthening of the palace proper. His innate drive for assault redirected for the moment into crafting deadly zones and optimized firing paths at bottlenecks designed to channel and annihilate any invaders to come. He compelled the Imperial Army detachments under his authority with unrelenting precision, insisting on levels of performance that ordinary soldiers could barely achieve. Still, they strove onward, compelled past their thresholds by the weight of his demands, emerging tougher, keener, deadlier in his service. It was in this period that I first detected faint alterations in his bearing. The dispassionate executor of combat started to reveal a contemplative side that had never marked him before. He devoted hours to the palace archives, poring over old volumes on strategy, not for their practical lessons, but for their grasp of the fighter's essence. He started discussing duty, not just as loyalty to his brothers and sovereign, but as an elevated calling that infused life with significance. Minor shifts, readily ignored in the whirlwind of preparations, yet profound when viewed in hindsight. The initial faint cracks in the rational base supporting his command mastery. Then arrived the female warrior, known as the Saint, Wh40K, once a chronicler, now heralding a creed without a title. She glided through the halls like a spark, portraying the Emperor not as a mere commander of mortals, but as a godlike figure, the realization of humanity's sacred aspirations. The majority of the Imperial Fists regarded her as an oddity, at most, or a hindrance, at worst. Yet I noticed Sigismund hovering on the fringes of her assemblies, his face inscrutable, though his focus unwavering. Her message struck a chord with an unspoken query stirring in him, an emptiness that battle tactics and leadership skill alone couldn't satisfy. The announcement of Horus's disloyalty hit the palace like a tangible strike. I was there when Rogel Dorn got the dispatch from the War Master exposing his deceit. The Primarch, ever composed, froze like marble, the data slate in his enormous grasp appearing to dwindle as his fingers clenched. But it was Sigismund who held my gaze that day. As disbelief and refusal spread among the assembly, his features set into an expression resembling foresight, not shock, not dread, but the somber certainty of someone braced for tempests who now spots the gathering thunderheads. In the wake of the revelation, while the Primarch withdrew to grapple with the vastness of his siblings' perfidy, Sigismund assembled the available captains of the Imperial Fists on Terra. Within a command chamber with a view of the palace expanse, He spoke to them with a sharpness and resolve that cut through the turmoil engulfing the Imperium. As part of my duty, I documented his statements, marking the instant when analytical review merged with an emerging zeal that bordered on the sacred. The War Master's betrayal isn't a lapse in planning, he declared to them, his tone steady, yet infused with a force that seized total focus. It is a lapse in intent. Horus strayed from the essence of our struggle, from the true aim of the Great Crusade. He fixated on the victories alone, ignoring the driving force beneath them. The Emperor doesn't dispatch us to subjugate planets merely to expand dominion, but to forge human unity against the perils ahead. The War Master overlooked that reality, and in doing so, he has condemned himself and his adherents. The captains absorbed his speech quietly, a few affirming with nods, while others fidgeted at the weight of his assertions. Sigismund hadn't outright challenged the imperial truth, the atheistic creed anchoring the Great Crusade, but an undercurrent in his perspective suggested a more profound layer. A deeper, more esoteric grasp of their purpose emerged among them. They came to view the Emperor's endeavors not simply as tactical necessities, but as acts of divine intervention, a gradual evolution that would eventually fracture into an unbridgeable divide amid the unfolding turmoil. Subsequently, in the secluded halls of the Templar Order, those initial fighters who laid the foundation for the future Black Templars, Sigismund uttered declarations destined to resonate across ages. From the dim corners, I documented his speech to his selected comrades, fulfilling my obligation as his tone resonated with oracular gravity, though, back then, I perceived it only as steadfast determination. He proclaimed that the warlord had unveiled humanity's authentic essence, his words slicing through the room like a sharpened edge. "We teeter on the brink of the era that will shape our species," he declared. Not one of logic or illumination, nor of advancement or harmony, but rather an epic of belief and flame, of sacrifice and zeal. The Emperor transcends our commander. He surpasses our maker. He embodies the singular authentic deity of humanity, and we serve as his blade. A few among them fidgeted uneasily at these assertions. The imperial creed still dominated, asserting the absence of deities or ethereal entities deserving veneration. Nevertheless, Sigismund proclaimed blasphemy with the assurance of a seer, and during moments of dire peril, logic yields to the utterance delivered with unyielding confidence. No one contested him. No one relayed his statements to the Primarch. Rather, they heeded him, and the germ of a militant creed began to sprout within their souls. I remember one fighter, Bohemond, destined to rise as a marshal of the Black Templars, posing an inquiry that pierced the core of the issue. If the Emperor possesses godliness, why does he withhold that title for himself? Why does he deny the existence of gods when his might rivals the divine? Sigismund's retort exposed the profundity of his budding doctrinal system. For a genuine deity requires no announcement of his sacred status. It exists inherently. The Emperor rejects his divinity not due to its invalidity, but because true belief demands voluntary surrender to hold strength. He challenges us, brothers. He observes to discern who will acknowledge the reality unaided, who will offer their allegiance not from obligation, but from innate conviction. This logic, though somewhat self-referential, appeased the assembly. It enabled them to harmonize their fidelity to the Emperor with their intensifying spiritual yearnings against the backdrop of interstellar catastrophe. Moreover, it elevated Sigismund beyond a mere battlefield superior, establishing him as a doctrinal mentor capable of discerning the Emperor's intentions, even amid apparent conflicts with official tenets. I observed Sigismund's transformation during those nascent phases of the schism. The once rigorous analytical combatant started embracing ceremonies. Prior to engagements, he abstained from food for a full day, followed by another in contemplation and supplication. He penned pious writings on vellum, incinerated them to cinders, then blended the remains with holy unguents to consecrate his armaments. He swore an oath to forego divesting his plate until the rebels fell, a pledge he upheld for epochs, well beyond the conclusion of the Siege of Terror and the Emperor's entombment on the Golden Throne. Such customs proliferated through the Templar ranks. Each soldier tailored them to his disposition while upholding the essential pious intensity Sigismund had instilled. They altered their plate mail, daubing sections in ebony to denote their elite role in the legion, incorporating pious inscriptions and seals of sanctity where previously only laurels of battle and tallies of foes adorned them. Their drills acquired liturgical dimensions, with invocations preceding every sparring bout, and each triumph or setback regarded as evidence of the emperor's blessing or a trial of their merit. Rogel Dorn noted these developments with his characteristic enigma. The Primarch adhered firmly to the imperial truth, to the non-religious bedrock of the Imperium his sire had forged. Yet he was a realist, aware that the impending strife demanded soldiers of total dedication whose determination would endure any atrocity. If spirituality forged that unyieldingness, it might prove a beneficial illusion, an inspiring legend suited to the forge of combat. The moniker Emperor's Champion was not granted to him. He seized it, tempering his essence in the furnace of his own beliefs. He directed the artisans to fashion plate of exquisite craftsmanship. Deep obsidian, where the imperial fists bore aureate hues, embellished with hallowed verses and solemn pledges, entwining the vambraces and greaves like fetters, anchoring him to his calling. Upon first donning that harness, an aspect of Sigismund perished, the individual acquainted with hesitation, who grasped terror, who valued moderation, became entombed beneath a veneer of total assurance. The craftsman toiled ceaselessly to fulfill Sigismund's precise directives for the armor. Master Guliman, the master of the Legion's armory himself, directed the forging of the armor, weaving in sacred artifacts salvaged from the vast campaigns of the Great Crusade. Within the chest guard lay shards of alloy drawn from the Emperor's personal armament, liquefied and recast amid incantations inscribed at the atomic level by the Kairosan Mechanicas using instruments of infinitesimal accuracy. The helm was crafted to mirror the unyielding face of imperial retribution, its visor forming a blank slate that hid the warrior beneath entirely. Once the panoply was finished, Sigismund enacted a ceremony of his own creation prior to encasing himself in it. He remained in contemplation for an entire day, abstaining from food and water, intoning the titles of each conflict he had endured in the Emperor's name. Afterward, he pierced his own flesh to draw forth blood, applying it to every piece of the armor in a rite that fused his vitality with the unyielding ceramite, symbolizing the merger of mortal form and divine craft. It was only then that he permitted the artificers to enclose him inside. Every joint was fastened with pious attention, every energy line sanctified as it connected to his shadowed carapace. Whether this was insanity or enlightenment, I cannot declare. The boundary between fanatic and holy figure frequently lies solely in hindsight's verdict. Yet I can confirm that upon Sigismund's unveiling in his obsidian plating, his fellow Astartes viewed him with a blend of reverence and disquiet. All except Rogel Dawn, who perceived in his chief lieutenant a blade sharpened to its finest edge. The Primarch might not have embraced Sigismund's intensifying pious zeal, but he grasped its value. After all, belief serves as yet another layer of defense. It bolsters determination where logic alone might yield. The change extended beyond the surface. Sigismund's approach to battle transformed in tandem with his inner revelation. Previously guided by methodical accuracy, he now acted with an uncanny foresight that bordered on the supernatural. His assaults ceased to be just effective, they became prophetic. Every impact a proclamation voiced through the dialect of war. He described fighting as a sacred rite, the fatal thrust as redemption, the outpouring of life as a holy offering. The Templar Order embraced these tenets, forging a warrior ethos laced with fervent worship that laid the groundwork for the Black Templars' future. It was in this era that Sigismund started assembling particular fighters to join him, individuals whose dispositions aligned with his burgeoning convictions. Beaumont, whose inquiry had exposed a spirit open to the Emperor's godhood. Cordon, whose reserved demeanor masked an essence yearning for higher meaning. Heracleus, whose savage rage gained clarity and aim through the observances Sigismund ordained. These figures, along with more, would constitute the nucleus of the eventual Black Templars' command. selected not solely for their prowess in arms, but for their capacity for faith. On the day the rebel armadas darkened the heavens over Terra, I joined the leadership cadre in the palace's strategos hall. Projection fields from tactical arrays cast an ethereal azure light across the space, revealing the vast enemy armada intent on raising the seat of power. Orbital bastions were already going dark, their transmissions fading sequentially under the onslaught of the turncoats. The assembled Primarchs were there, sanguineous, his pinions tucked like a funeral veil at his back, Jagatai Khan thrumming with restrained vigor, and Rogol Dorn, steadfast as the fortifications he had raised, scrutinizing the projections with the poise of near gods. Sigismund broke the silence, his tone laced with an assurance that defied the dire imbalance. "They shall shatter against the ramparts of our devotion," he declared. And in that instant, I witnessed an exchange between him and the Primarchs, not quite endorsement, but acknowledgement. Amid the encroaching shadow, pure intellect would prove insufficient. They required passion to counter passion. They needed fighters who ignored probabilities and rose above them. Rogol Dawn faced his premier captain, his features as inscrutable as always, yet his stare carried an intensity that conveyed much. "You shall be their initial challenge," the Primarch intoned, his words resembling boulders shifting on stone. "Select your comrades, hold the eternity gate, bar any betrayer while life sustains you." Sigismund inclined his head, a motion at once martial and pious. "As you order, my lord, as he decrees." The subtle stress on the latter phrase caught the Primarch's ear, though he offered no reply. Instead, he returned to the glowing projections, immersed once more in tactical choices and troop placements. Sigismund withdrew, rallying his Templar kin for an epic defense that would echo through the Imperium's annals. The siege of Terra has been documented by scholars far wiser than I in tomes filling whole archive planets. I served merely as a witness to that cataclysm, and the recollections of those hours now fade into haze. Everything blurred together in that nightmare of flames and slaughter, amid the endless rumbling growl that felt like it rose from the palace's very foundations. Yet Sigismund cuts through those recollections with brutal sharpness. During the siege, he was a constant presence, a dark storm sweeping from one frantic clash to the next, always rushing to the direst hotspots, always where mortality loomed largest. I recall him at the Eternity Wall spaceport, where the renegade troops had carved out a beachhead. The Loyalists were yielding ground inch by agonizing inch, with the fallen's corpses piling up as improvised barriers for the survivors to battle over. Sigismund showed up leading a squad of his Templar comrades, all armored in ebony like him, each displaying the emblems of their emerging creed. They didn't charge straight into the fray. Rather, he guided them to a chapel inside the spaceport, a modest sanctuary that had miraculously survived the ruin. There, with peril cascading around them, they dropped to their knees in devotion. A few of the human troops watched in shock, fury even, convinced these superhuman fighters were shirking their roles right when they were needed most. But upon rising, the Black Templars advanced with a unity that went far beyond mere combat tactics. It was like they shared a single will, a singular drive, their actions steered by forces outside standard strategy. Leading them, Sigismund swung his sword so swiftly it vanished from sight. Just a crimson streak lingering in the atmosphere showed its arc. The chapel they'd just vacated crumbled moments later under a traitor shell's direct strike, turned to dust in an instant. By that point, though, Sigismund and his brothers had plunged into foe territory, carving a swath of havoc that entered the annals of myth. They battled heedless of personal peril, yet with an exactness that contradicted their seeming scorn for battlefield rules. It felt like they dwelled in a realm of insight above the ordinary scrum, detecting rhythms and openings hidden from everyone else. I witnessed him face off against a traitor legion's champion. That day, a hulking brute whose plate had twisted under warp influences into a hideous mockery of the Astartes shape. The beast brandished a maul surging with eerie powers, every blow warping existence around it like a wound. It roared heresies from jaws that gaped impossibly across a visage in perpetual flux. But Sigismund stood firm. He showed no pause. He flowed like liquid past the monster's savage lunges, his weapon slipping through armor seams that ought to be impenetrable. spilling ichor that sizzled and evaporated on contact with the breeze. By my timepiece, the confrontation dragged on for 17 minutes, though to onlookers it felt both fleeting and eternal. The traitor champion was no novice warrior, no ordinary trooper boosted past his limits by chaos boons. He was a survivor of 100 campaigns, his prowess sharpened across decades of conflict, now amplified by his foul master's gifts. Still, pitted against Sigismund, he came off as almost awkward, his strikes mighty yet foreseeable, his guard sturdy but wanting. When the traitor champion toppled, Sigismund offered no nod to the win. No instant of glory, no salute to his prowess. He simply pressed on to the following adversary and the one after, each slaying just another invocation to his god-emperor. Once the spaceport fell under control, his obsidian plate was drenched in viscera to the point where the sacred writings etched into it vanished from view. Solely the white cross on his pauldron stood out, a bold emblem of devotion piercing the slaughter. As the siege dragged on, tales of the Ebony Knight swelled. Loyalist ranks rallied at his arrival in their zone, sure it meant the emperor's gaze and blessing upon them. The betrayers came to dread the glimpse of his night-shaded armor and the white cross emblazoned on it. Officers from either faction started weaving his path into their plans, treating him like an elemental power instead of a lone fighter amid legions. But catching him in those lulls between skirmishes revealed how his own myth was devouring the man inside. I once discovered him in a battered strategium, bowed before an altar pieced together from war's refuse. At its heart wasn't a classic aquila or imperial badge, but a shattered shard of ceramite, clearly a sliver from the emperor's personal harness, salvaged from some forgotten fight. Sigismund had placed tapers encircling it, their glow bouncing off his shell as he stayed frozen in supplication. I'm positive he sensed me there. Still, he gave no sign. He lingered for hours until a messenger brought news of fresh attacks, then stood silently to confront them. What vows did he whisper in those shadowed times? What oaths did he swear to the deity he had deified? I cannot explain why Sigismund chose to embody that role, even when the emperor rejected claims of godhood. Yet I recognize that every clash, every death inflicted, chipped away at the essence of Sigismund the individual, offering it up to Sigismund the icon. He transformed into the embodiment the Imperium demanded, a beacon of unwavering devotion in an era where assurance ranked as the rarest treasure. What started as weeks of bombardment stretched into months, the combat ceaseless, the losses piling up beyond reckoning. The palace fortifications, architectural triumphs crafted by Rogel Dorn, started to yield beneath the unyielding barrage from the betrayers' legions. The perimeter zones crumbled sequentially. The Loyalists had to retreat to inner defenses, yielding territory soaked in rivers of gore. Amid this chaos, Sigismund and his obsidian-clad fighters materialized at the hottest points of engagement. Their arrival frequently tipped the scales from rout to a frantic standoff that granted vital time to the broader fortifications. Those nearest to him could see the strain etched into Sigismund's demeanor. His bodily strength remained undimmed, but an all-devouring fervor drove his moves, surpassing simple battlefield prowess. He battled as though every skirmish could mark his end, as if flawless brutality alone could achieve his destiny. The intervals between fights, previously devoted to strategy sessions and gear upkeep, now surrendered fully to worship and ceremonies. He consumed just enough to fuel his augmented frame, rested solely when exhaustion overtook him, and uttered words only for directives or to guide his troops through self-devised rites of piety. It was in these grueling times that Sigismund started shaping the doctrinal principles that would later anchor the Black Templars' convictions. During scarce lulls in the storm, he would assemble his most trusted comrades and delve into his grasp of the Emperor's sacred essence, humanity's role amid a vicious cosmos, and the holy obligation of the Astartes to act as conduits for the Lord of mankind's intentions. These sessions weren't polished lectures, but raw probings of a belief hammered out in warfare's forge. Every revelation sprang from the gore-drenched truth of the encirclement. Quote Fior. He declared to them at one such assembly, lit by the sputtering glow of a generator room fueling the Sanctum Imperialis's gun emplacements. Nor are we mere tools, despite fulfilling both roles. We embody his reckoning in the flesh, his purpose reaching into a star-spanning realm that has lost sight of righteousness. Every strike we land challenges not only the foes at hand, but the idea itself of rebellion against his vision for our kind. When we slay, we don't simply extinguish existence. We deliver judgment on that existence, deeming it deficient before the sole arbiter that counts. In the era before the heresy erupted, such pronouncements might have branded as perilous apostasy. But now, as the Imperium hovered on oblivion's edge, with the rational pillars of the imperial truth exposed as frail barriers against chaos's flood, these ideas took deep root in the souls of soldiers craving purpose within the carnage. The Templar kin didn't merely hear, they absorbed Sigismund's doctrines, each turning into a proponent who disseminated the faith across the legion's ranks. The siege's closing phase burned indelibly into the minds of those who endured. The renegade Primarch Horus dropped his flagship's void barriers, daring the Emperor to confront him directly. The sovereign of humanity set out for that climactic duel, accompanied by Sanguinius of the Blood Angels and Rogel Dorn. With their departure, safeguarding the palace devolved to the rest. Sigismund assumed control at a pivotal breach in the ramparts, where the traitors surged inward like a poisonous deluge. From an oversight post, I watched him coordinate the counter, his tone revealing no weariness after endless weeks of strife. He positioned his units with a strategist's exactitude, though his plans now carried the imprint of his maturing creed. Where he once emphasized conserving troops and supplies, he now invoked self-sacrifice and devotion, invoking ends that would spur others to bolder acts of bravery. The troops he led clashed with a doomed zeal, aware that withdrawal was impossible, that every inch demanded payment in lifeblood. "Defend this position," he ordered a blended detachment of imperial fists and mortal auxiliaries. His command sliced through the din of warfare like a sword. Not for positional gain or operational need, but because he demands it of you. Right here, right now, you form the pivot on which humanity's destiny balances. Every instant you claim with your life's essence grants him another moment to act. On the deck of the Vengeful Spirit, those final commands rang out. Perish if necessary, but face the foe as you fall. Perish with his title echoing in your final breath. Perish assured that your offering holds purpose far beyond the grasp of human understanding. Such declarations might have rung hollow against the nightmare arrayed before them. The betrayers encompassed not only the twisted remnants of the fallen legions, but also infernal beings whose presence shattered reason, their shapes twisting in unnatural patterns, their utterances laced with insanity in every word. Still, the loyalists surged forward, ordinary humans aligned beside superhuman fighters, all fortified by the unyielding belief emanating from the dark-armored champion at their forefront. Then arrived the instant destined to resound across countless ages. A shudder rippled through the fabric of existence. Every being on Terra sensed it, a warp-born pulse that pierced beyond bodily feeling. In that flash, we grasped it instinctively, without words to describe, that a pivotal shift had transpired aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The enemy ranks wavered too, their momentum breaking as bewilderment rippled among them. Sigismund remained utterly motionless in the turmoil, his helm canted as though attuned to some far-off whisper. With measured poise, he unclasped his helmet. It marked the initial glimpse of his visage since the blockade's outset. His countenance was haggard, flesh ashen from endless confinement in his plate, yet his stare blazed with a fierce glow, nearly blinding to witness. He directed his sight upward to the remote combat vessel where fates hung in balance. Quote, "Ought." Sigismund declared, his tone laced with an unassailable certainty. No one required clarification on his reference, yet he persists. The fleshly sovereign has fallen. The eternal deity has awakened. How he discerned Horus's downfall, the emperor's grievous injury, defies my reckoning. It could stem from the raw instinct of a soldier surrendered entirely to devotion, or perhaps a deeper essence, a fragment of divine might extending to his most faithful follower. The key point is that amid this supreme peril, Sigismund emerged as the herald of a reborn imperial doctrine. The human emperor had departed, yet allegiance to him would persist. In truth, it would form the bedrock for a revitalized imperium. The foes shattered shortly thereafter, their hosts withdrawing from Terra in utter rout, Yet no revelry marked the triumph, no exultation. The emperor was enshrined within the golden throne, his corporeal shell irreparably fractured, upheld solely by the relic mechanisms of that mystic apparatus and his inscrutable resolve. Rogal Dorn stepped from that climactic clash transformed, his resolute bearing now shadowed by a grief that pierced to his essence. And it was toward Sigismund he looked when the matter of chasing the fleeing betrayers surfaced. Within the strategium of the imperial palace, repurposed as a war council for the fractured imperium's commanders, I observed as primarchs and nobles weighed their options. Certain voices urged fortification, locking down the emperor's surviving domains before venturing to recover the forfeit territories. Others pressed for relentless chase, capitalizing on the enemy's disorder. Rogal Dorn absorbed each perspective with his characteristic solemn focus, though his gaze repeatedly drifted to Sigismund, who lingered quietly on the assembly's periphery. At length, the Primarch addressed his premier captain outright. "What course would you chart, Sigismund?" Silence gripped the hall. For a Primarch to solicit guidance from a mere Astartes, however legendary like Sigismund, was rare. Yet in that juncture, it felt fitting. Sigismund had transcended the role of space marine. He embodied a fresh mode of conflict, waged not merely through gunfire and steel, but through zeal and wrath. Quote 9. Sigismund responded, his declaration heavy with vow-like gravity. Quote 10. His pronouncement carried a conclusive edge that quelled additional contention, and in Rogal Dorn's expression, I discerned a resolve solidifying. The Codex Astartes took shape. The Grand Legions yielded to compact chapters. The Imperial Fists yielded, true to their essence. But not every element stayed beneath the Primarch's oversight. Certain warriors would assume a novel banner, an unending holy war. The Black Templars' inception unfolded without fanfare. Sigismund genuflected before Rogal Dorn for the final occasion, earning his Primarch's sanction, and the revered blade called the Sword of the High Marshals. Then he stood tall, forsaking his station as first captain of the Imperial Fists, to claim the title of High Marshal of the Black Templars. His journey lay. While fellow chapters opted for reconstruction, Sigismund chose relentless pursuit. As others reinforced their positions, he launched assaults. His holy war offered no respite, no sanctuary, no interval of tranquility. The blade bestowed upon him was far from a commonplace armament. Folklore claimed it was crafted from a shard of the emperor's personal sword. A tale echoed around numerous artifacts from that time, with scant proof to back them up. Undeniably, the sword was archaic even in those days, its energy shield emitter following a design long obsolete in the Martian foundries. Its equilibrium was flawless, as if it foresaw the user's desires instead of just reacting to them. In Sigismund's grasp, it transformed into a prolongation of his resolve, a tangible embodiment of his mission, serving equally as an emblem and an instrument of combat. I joined him on the freshly dedicated Eternal Crusader, persisting in my duty as historian for his emerging chapter. It was in the initial phases of this eternal campaign that my organic body at last gave out, my mind relocated into the cybernetic shell I occupy today. It seemed apt, mirroring how Sigismund had evolved from mere mortal to iconic figure. Likewise, I was reshaped from fleeting life to enduring witness. We each were evolving beyond humanity, tied to objectives that would survive our biological spans. The relocation wasn't free of peril or agony. Most of my brain tissue was delicately removed and immersed in a nourishing solution, linked via intricate filaments to the enhanced cogitator nucleus that would serve as my fresh abode. For several weeks I lingered in a liminal haze, part organic and part synthetic, while my neural patterns were meticulously charted and moved over. During the entire operation, Sigismund came to the apothecary's chamber overseeing the procedure, keeping a quiet watch, determined to safeguard this chronicle of his achievements and the chapter's inception from any mishaps of tech malfunction. Once the operation concluded and I regained complete sentience in my updated body, it was Sigismund who spoke to me first. Quote 11. he declared, his tone neither celebratory nor compassionate, merely stating reality. Quote 12. At that instant, I realized I had outgrown the role of basic recorder. I had become a vital repository, a vault of the chapter's legacy and tenets, an anchor for tomorrow's Black Templars to grasp their progenitor's intent. It was a privilege laced with obligation, an eternal life demanding endless devotion. In this aspect as well, I echoed Sigismund, whose life had fully merged into his obligation to the Emperor and the unending quest he had sparked. The perpetual campaign ignited in the Segmentum Solar, tracking down renegade elements dispersed following the siege. Yet, Sigismund's ambitions stretched well past basic pacification efforts. He split his chapter into crusade armadas, each commanded by a marshal empowered by his mandate, each pledged to hound the emperor's foes without pause. The chapter forsook any planetary base. Their vessels would act as mobile bastions, ever roaming, ever battling. No Black Templar would taste serenity. This was their cross to bear and their crown of honor. Structuring these crusade armadas showcased brilliance in supply chains and tactical planning. Each was built to function autonomously for extended periods if required, transporting not only the core combatants but also the essential infrastructure to support them. Fabrication bays for repairing and crafting arms and plating, medical bays for tending the injured and propagating gene seed, indoctrination halls where aspirants could undergo trials in infusion, sanctuaries to conduct the chapter's expanding rituals, all housed in colossal starships primed for warp jumps spanning the Imperium's expanse and further. Sigismund himself directed the assembly of the inaugural 3 crusade armadas, choosing their marshals judiciously, allotting to each a blend of battle-hardened survivors from the siege and recent initiates brought into the fold post-creation. This equilibrium proved vital. The elders bore the vivid recollections of their struggle, of the atrocities beheld when chaos raged over Terra. The novices injected renewed passion, free from the weariness of that cataclysmic strife. United, they created the core of an unparalleled warrior cadre in the splintered Imperium, propelled not by tactical demands or factional bonds, but by devout passion and unyielding drive. The chapter's essence was molded amid those formative battles, whereas the imperial fists embodied endurance, the Black Templars. They were fervent in their zeal. While the parent legion prized rigid discipline, this successor chapter prized unyielding devotion above all. Recruits weren't simply drilled in combat. They were steeped in doctrine, instructed to view their service not as obligation, but as a sacred vocation. The ceremonies Sigismund had embraced amid the siege evolved into enduring chapter customs, battle hymns, periods of abstinence, solemn vows, the blessing of blades, all forging a martial ethos rooted equally in piety and battlefield skill. The grueling program Sigismund established proved ruthlessly efficient, forging fighters who transcended mere bodily strength to embody unbreakable spiritual resolve. Novices endured prolonged seclusion, immersing themselves in the chapter's doctrines and the doctrinal writings Sigismund had penned. They faced increasingly intense mock battles, not only to hone their warrior abilities, but to gauge their conviction amid duress. Any who wavered, revealing uncertainty or pause, were relegated to lowly tasks or auxiliary duties aboard the crusade armadas. Solely those exhibiting both martial excellence and ironclad faith advanced to initiate status and don the ebony plate of a true warrior brother. This rigorous culling meant the Black Templars, though sparse compared to grander chapters, achieved a singular focus that rendered them ferocious in war. They clashed not as glory-hungry loners or calculated squads following maneuvers, but as a unified entity driven by collective belief that eclipsed personal selves. In this way, they mirrored their progenitor, whose essence had fused wholly with his mantle as the Emperor's defender and inaugural High Marshal of the Endless Crusade. Sigismund personally spearheaded the riskiest ventures, perpetually charging at the vanguard of the crusade, ever pursuing the deadliest adversaries. His renown swelled with every triumph, echoing across the Imperium as it clawed its way back from the heresy's ruin. To certain souls, he embodied heroism, to others an indispensable harshness. Yet, To his Black Templar kin, he stood as vivid validation of their tenets. Loyalty to the Emperor could elevate a common soldier to divine heights. Belief alone could surmount any barrier, vanquish any enemy. I chronicled the fallout from one especially ferocious offensive against a pact of Xenos marauders who had exploited the Imperium's frailty to carve out a bastion in territories once securely human. The clashes were ferocious. The Black Templars had to overhaul their approaches to neutralize the extraterrestrial tech crafted to undermine the strengths of Astartes' biology and gear. Numerous brethren perished. Their progenoids were salvaged at tremendous expense from killing fields drenched in alien venoms that eroded power armor and tissue in equal measure. Once the dust settled, as the chapter conducted rites for the departed, Sigismund rallied the remnants within the grand nave of the Eternal Crusader. His plate armor displayed the scars of fresh warfare, profound slashes and corrosive scars that the forgemasters would toil over for weeks to mend. Yet, he declined to shed it, positioning himself before his followers as a vivid symbol of their ordeal, his injuries bearing witness to the Crusade's price. Quote 13, he declared, his tone resonating through the immense hall unaided by voxcasters. Quote 14. Such words might ring empty from lesser commanders, particularly after a drive yielding steep casualties for scant tactical rewards. But from Sigismund, they bore the gravity of total certainty. The Black Templars didn't merely heed him, they internalized his message, discovering in his teachings a structure that imbued their losses with significance and their torment with direction. Herein lay Sigismund's profound insight as a commander. He didn't just demand submission or kindle allegiance. He wove a grand narrative around the merciless truths of their lives, alchemizing raw endurance into sanctified mission. Still, as one who watched him during the hushed interludes amid conflicts, I witnessed the burden this evolution exacted. Sigismund seldom doffed his armor these days, even in repose. Austerity defined his existence. He retired to a bare chamber, its walls lined solely with sacred scriptures and arms displayed as holy artifacts. His sustenance, sparse and infrequent, was devoured mechanically, devoid of savor or focus. Mundane distractions evaporated from his thoughts, yielding to the relentless drive that propelled him onward. He was evolving beyond mere humanity into a pure instrument of duty, the sovereign's retribution incarnate. Occasionally, he entered the repository where my cybernetic shell resided, amid vaults of campaign logs etched into crystalline matrices and fastened securely. There, he lingered wordlessly, poring over chronicles of ancient clashes, fallen comrades, triumphs and setbacks that forged the Black Templars into their current form. In those instances, I detected faint traces of introspection, or maybe hesitation, fleeting across his countenance, though they swiftly vanished. Any internal conflicts tormenting Sigismund's psyche always concluded in unwavering loyalty, an endless holy war. Infrequently, he addressed me personally, not in his capacity as supreme commander to archival scribe, but as a veteran of this era's dawn confiding in a fellow observer. Quote 15. He murmured one time, his tone so hushed it could pass for a glitch in my auditory systems. Quote 16. We were naive youths in those times, toying with conflict while blind to the abyssal perils encircling our fragile glow. I offered no reply, bound by protocol to document, not converse. Yet Sigismund pressed on regardless. The Emperor foresaw it all. He comprehended the lurking emptiness eternally. What purpose in forging fighters like ours, save to confront terrors defying human grasp? What rationale for birthing the Primarchs, if not to helm a strife enduring across epochs? That vast expedition served as mere rehearsal, assembling might for the impending cataclysm. And here we stand in that fray, uncertain of triumph's feasibility, certain only that capitulation lies beyond endurance. Such contemplative interludes grew scarcer over the ages. As though the remnants of Sigismund's former self dissolved into the archetype he embodied, the High Marshal withdrew further, issuing commands to his lieutenants via edicts and sermons on faith, rarely joining tactical discussions or forging bonds that defined command in rival orders. Still, his command remained unchallenged. Indeed, the enigmatic veil cloaking him amplified his reverence within the Black Templars, elevating him from mere guide to symbol, a vital manifestation of their mission and doctrine. Eras flowed by, yet the crusade endured. While other chapters cultivated rites, erected bastion keeps, and nurtured identities diverging from their founding legion, the Black Templars pressed on in perpetual flux. Their sole anchor, the perpetual battle. Their forces burgeoned past the Codex's limit of 1,000 Astartes. For how does one tally a brotherhood dispersed amid the cosmos, entangled in 100 separate purges? Who would presume to rebuke the Emperor's own advocate for his fervent assault on humanity's foes? As the Imperium solidified into its timeless configuration, with the High Lords of Terra entrenching their rule and the ecclesiarchy ascending to power, the Black Templars occupied a peculiar niche. Their zealous piety, once teetering on heresy beside the imperial truth, now meshed seamlessly with the realm's prevailing creed. The Emperor's godhood received formal sanction, his cult evolving into the official faith-knitting myriad planets beneath the Aquila. Sigismund's once fringe vision had transformed into canonical tenet. Nevertheless, the Black Templars shunned exploiting this harmony for worldly leverage. They spurned bids to parlay sacred cloud into riches or sway. Their gaze stayed fixed on the crusade alone, the unending clash versus mankind's adversaries. In truth, Sigismund grew even more detached from the Imperium's overarching hierarchy, entrusting envoys to his subordinates while he spearheaded assaults personally, pursuing the gravest adversaries, the foulest planets, the most desperate perils to the Emperor's domain. Sigismund matured, as Space Marines invariably do, albeit with deliberate slowness relative to baseline humans. Wrinkles etched his visage deeper. His closely shorn hair and beard shifted from tawny to ashen, yet his expertise sharpened undiminished. Rather, every annum of warfare refined him more keenly. Each skirmish layered additional mastery onto his command acumen. Where vigor once supplied agility and power, maturity bestowed a refined precision of fury. A sight both grim and mesmerizing unfolded before us, every motion precise, every blow deliberate. He dispatched his foes with the detached precision of a seasoned artisan at work. The span of crusades stretched from centuries into a full millennium, yet Sigismund pressed forward undeterred. Even the superhuman resilience of Astartes biology could not forever ward off the ravages of profound age. His once smooth actions, fluid like liquid mercury, grew subtly more rigid. The intervals for recuperation after clashes extended. Injuries that had mended in mere days now demanded weeks. Such deterioration escaped notice from the majority. Yet I, having watched him across 1,000 years, perceived the shift clearly, as did he himself. It may have been this awareness that prompted Sigismund, upon hearing of a vast chaos invasion close to the Eye of Terror, to command an urgent redirection of path. This event, later dubbed the First Black Crusade and spearheaded by Abaddon the Despoiler, successor to Horus's infamous betrayal, drew reports of an army unmatched in scale and savagery. Traitor Astartes, who had lingered in the Eye's reality-bending hold for that millennium since the heresy, now surged forth to resume the conflict their disgraced Primarch had ignited. The voyage toward the Gothic sector passed in quiet reflection. Sigismund devoted much of it to the vessel's chapel, positioned on his knees before the shrine with his venerable sword placed out before him. The blade, much like its owner, carried scars from countless conflicts. Its sharpness remained lethal, though the steel had eroded and been reshaped repeatedly through the ages. From the darkness, I monitored him, my enhanced perception picking up faint alterations in his vital signs. His pulse, typically rhythmic like clockwork, would stutter at times. His respiration, ordinarily even and disciplined, would hitch briefly. Minor indicators hidden from ordinary eyes, yet revealing to someone who had documented his traits for 1,000 years. Sigismund recognized that this loomed as his concluding confrontation, and he accepted it with the unyielding resolve that had defined his existence ever since donning the obsidian plate of the Emperor's champion. Amid this transit, he drafted what posterity would call Sigismund's Last Testament, a record safeguarded in the Black Templars' vaults and pored over by future generations of fighters not yet born. Far from a manual on maneuvers or an evaluation of the impending clash, it offered a spiritual contemplation, a refined essence of the conviction he had tempered through a millennium of strife. He delved not into triumphs or losses, nor into particular operations or adversaries, but into the essence of the unending conflict the Black Templars battled and would sustain long beyond his departure. The war endures forever, he inscribed with a script frail from years, yet unwavering in its accuracy. It concludes neither with the fall of one foe, nor the freeing of one planet, nor the demise of one soldier. It persists through epochs and voids, an unchanging force shaping humanity's fate in this unforgiving cosmos. We do not battle for tranquility, as such calm would expose us to the warp's corruptions and the aliens' incursions. We do not strive for triumph, since absolute success would spell the cessation of resolve, the voiding of intent. We engage because it defines our essence, fulfills our obligation, stands as the soul-fitting reply to the shadows encircling us. Within war's fierce forge, we uncover the truest embodiment of the Emperor's design, the sharpest revelation of his sacred intent for humanity, to serve as his blade, his bulwark, his blaze amid the gloom. Upon reaching the Corone system, the ruin was already widespread. Multiple planets blazed, their terrains ravaged by barrages from orbit and assaults from the surface. Surviving elements of the Imperial Navy had retreated to the system's periphery, holding a frantic barrier that chaos assailants harried and challenged without fully shattering. Dominating the foe's fleet stood a craft of colossal stature, a profaned battle barge pinpointed by scouts as the Vengeful Spirit, the very flagship where the Emperor had almost perished. Horus's command vessel, now seized by his heir, Abaddon. That ship's moniker evoked more than mere tactical import. It embodied humanity's most profound treachery, the instant when the Imperium teetered on internal collapse. For Sigismund, who endured the siege of Terra yet never clashed head-on with Horus, the Vengeful Spirit symbolized the supreme ordeal, the tangible form of everything he had vowed to defy. Its re-emergence in the material realm to unleash fresh strikes against the Imperium marked both blasphemy and a pivotal moment, an opening to face not merely Abaddon, but the enduring shadow of Horus. Sigismund directed the Eternal Crusader to drive straight into the enemy's ranks, targeting the shadowy core of the Chaos Armada. Most naval tacticians would label such a maneuver reckless to the point of folly, but the veteran warrior, no ship embodied such brazen resolve like the barge did. Its fortified bow cleaved through enemy hulls as if slicing warm meat, while its armament arrays blasted aside the lesser craft that dared to engulf it. The injuries to our craft ran deep, yet Sigismund paid no heed to the hull's condition. His mind was fixed on one goal, arriving at Abaddon, confronting the heir of Horus in a way he never could the War Master in person. The space skirmish unfolded as a brutal orchestra of ruin, a lethal ballet of starships amid the shadows linking planets. Every turn was designed to unleash the heaviest barrages while dodging foes' fire as much as possible. The Eternal Crusader wasn't built for finesse. It served as a brutal mallet, swung with grim intent, charging headlong at its mark no matter the toll. Vessels ignited behind us, foes and friends alike consumed in flames. As Sigismund's unyielding drive shaped tactics of raw directness and crushing impact, we pierced the deceptive stillness at the storm's core. Suddenly, within striking distance of the Vengeful Spirit, the heretic capital ship's colossal batteries swiveled toward us, but Sigismund had already proceeded to the teleportarium bay. An assault team stood ready, comprising 100 battle-hardened Black Templars, each a veteran of countless wars. They aimed to beam onto the hostile craft, battle to Abaddon, and shatter the Black Crusade by severing its leadership. Choosing this squad wasn't random or just by rank. Sigismund selected every fighter himself, guided not only by skill in battle or strategic insight, but by an elusive trait he knew intimately. Faith, deeper than rote devotion, a core conviction that overrode logic and feeling. These fighters, mirroring their high marshal, had remade themselves from mortals into tools of war, yielding personal selves to serve as extensions of the Emperor's decree. Prior to mounting the teleport platform, Sigismund addressed me directly, an uncommon nod to my existence. For ages he had permitted my watching and noting in silence, treating me as just another shipboard element, not a sentient being. Yet now his gaze, forged in 1,000 years of conflict, met mine, and he uttered words etched indelibly in my memory. "Chronicle every detail, chronicler," he commanded, his gravelly murmur still ringing with timeless command. "Ensure future generations learn that faith persists beyond the body's end. That obligation endures past mortality, that the Emperor shields us even in defeat." With that, he vanished in a burst of teleportation light, leaving me to track the clash via the vessel's sensor webs and the intermittent vox signals from the intruders. The melee raged fiercely. The Black Templars hacked a trail of devastation along the tainted passages of the vengeful spirit. Yet the guards weren't simple renegade Astartes. They were harbingers of hopelessness, Abaddon's elite terminators, veterans who had battled beside Horus in the heresy, and they inflicted horrific losses on the invaders. Vox reports from the team depicted a vision of horrific warfare. The vengeful spirit's innards, warped by its tenure in the Eye of Terror, no longer followed the orderly layouts of Imperial engineering. Instead, they warped to the chaotic dictates of the ruinous powers. Weightlessness flipped abruptly. Bulkheads turned to pathways, and overheads gaped into voids, connecting nothing and everything simultaneously. The atmosphere itself poisoned the lungs, laden with murmurs that drove the careless to insanity, temptations of dominion that challenged the resolve of the truest believers. Amid this infernal maze, the Black Templars advanced with their trademark relentless focus. Every advance came soaked in gore. Every crossroads claimed at the price of comrades slain by injuries that mocked nature's rules for body and force. Still, they pushed ahead, fueled by Sigismund's unbreakable resolve as he charged at the vanguard, his relic sword hewing through meat and the fabric of existence toward the ship's nucleus, where their prey lurked. From the sentry who materialized on board, scarcely 12 arrived at the bridge where Abaddon waited, and foremost among them strode Sigismund, his veteran plate scarred anew, his stride hampered by combat scars, yet his resolve unshaken. The feed from his suit captured Abaddon ascending from a seat forged from the fused arms of slain loyalists, a colossal form in Terminator armor, festooned with mementos of 10,000 horrors. In his grasp lay Drachnion, no mere blade, but a prison for a demon of vast might. Abaddon bore little resemblance to the man Sigismund once knew. The former first captain of the Luna Wolves had been a mighty fighter, undoubtedly, yet one who retained a distinctly mortal build and bearing. The figure confronting them now was both greater and lesser in nature. His protective gear had fused seamlessly with his skin, the divide between them erased by the corrupting touch of the warp. His visage bore a lattice of scars like a perpetual grimace, his head shaven except for the distinctive topknot that marked him long before the great betrayal. Yet it was his gaze that betrayed the deepest transformation. Once alight with drive, arrogance, and a crude sense of integrity, they now blazed with a loathing so refined it surpassed simple feeling, manifesting as a tangible power akin to an inescapable pull. "Lapdog comes to heel." The words emerged from Abaddon's helmet speaker in a warped rasp, yet the scorn laced through them rang crystal clear. Quote 18. Sigismund offered no verbal retort. He lunged forward. The confrontation that ensued would echo through the ages, its details preserved mainly in my personal chronicle, as reliable records are scarce. Two legendary warriors, embodiments of clashing philosophies, forged alike in a millennium of strife and animosity. Abaddon wielded the vigor of youth alongside the sinister boons from the chaos deities. Sigismund countered with seasoned expertise and unwavering commitment to his oath. They proved perfectly balanced, their weapons flashing at velocities that even the enhanced perceptions of the Astartes onlookers struggled to track amid the flurry of strikes. The surviving Black Templars encircled the combatants, repelling the Despair-bringers eager to disrupt the fray. This skirmish nested within the broader tumult. The result of one hung directly on the other. Should Sigismund perish, his assault team would succumb to the onslaught. If the defensive ring shattered, Abdon would gain allies to sway the personal showdown decisively. Each leader grasped this truth. Each battled aware that their intimate struggle formed just one thread in a vast tapestry weaving across the vessel, the star system, and indeed the entire cosmos. By the precise timer, the duel raged for 17 minutes. Neither gained a decisive edge. Sigismund's edge repeatedly clashed against Abdon's plating, etching gashes into the Terminator armor that might have felled ordinary foes. Abdon, for his part, nearly concluded the High Marshal's life on several occasions, coming mere fractions of an inch from victory. Solely Sigismund's extraordinary instincts enabled him to evade or deflect assaults, freighted not only with raw might, but also with corrupting essence from beyond. The floor beneath them grew slippery with crimson and ebony fluids, making every step hazardous, while the atmosphere hung heavy with the acrid smell of scorched alloy and the sharp bite of energized blades at peak output. Yet endurance and injuries wore on Sigismund, who was already seeping from prior wounds incurred during the advance. His blocks arrived a heartbeat delayed, his ripostes diminished in force, failing to breach Abdon's reinforced shell. In time, the unavoidable transpired. Abdon exploited a flaw in Sigismund's defenses, his demon blade thrusting past the guard to impale the primary heart. The Black Templar reeled, yet held his ground. Rallying his final reserves, he plunged his own weapon into Abdon's torso. No fatal strike, but a grievous one, gouging the War Master's innards even as his own suffered the same fate. They remained interlocked for an instant, adversaries impaled on mutual steel, each refusing to yield first. Abdon rasped once more, his tone a gurgling snarl as Viti choked his windpipe. Quote 19. Sigismund's reply, relayed via his suit's communicator to the Eternal Crusader despite the ravages to his gear, cut through sharply. Quote 20. Quote 21. Abdon pressed, grinding his sword further into the wound. Quote 22. Murmured the High Marshal. Then, with his dying exhale, he sprayed blood across his slayer's features. Abdon bellowed in rage and yanked his weapon loose, permitting Sigismund's form to crumple onto the deck. The leftover Black Templars battled fiercely to retrieve their slain commander, with several giving their lives to safeguard his remains and the venerable blade in his grasp. Through acts of valor born of desperation and exacting a heavy toll, they withdrew to the teleportarium and beamed aboard the Eternal Crusader, carrying the earthly husk of the Emperor's foremost servant. We withdrew from the engagement at that point, our vessel sorely battered and vital functions faltering. Still, the astropaths charted a path evading the fiercest clashes, and we hobbled from the Koran system even as the inaugural Black Crusade despoiled the region. Abdon would later pull his legions toward the Eye of Terror, though not before unleashing atrocities that decimated forces and seized countless planets for the forces of ruin. The baleful forces of chaos. According to the majority of tactical evaluations, that initial Black Crusade ultimately favored the forces of disorder. The voyage back proved a mournful cortege. Sigismund's remains were tended in line with the rituals he had personally instituted. His plate armor was meticulously stripped away and mended, his injuries washed and bandaged as though he slumbered peacefully instead of lying lifeless. The chapter's apothecaries harvested his gene seed with profound respect, safeguarding the Emperor's champion's genetic inheritance for the forthcoming ranks of Black Templars. His armament was polished and sanctified, the venerable blade secured within a stasis field to keep it intact, pending the selection of his replacement. Across the vessel, the brothers kept a solemn watch, with each fighter rotating to stand sentinel beside the departed High Marshal, testifying to his offering and emulating the standard he had forged for their guidance. Incantations echoed without cease, the combat shrines occupied around the clock by figures clad in ebony plate, chanting the devotions Sigismund had authored, drawing from ceremony a framework to harness their sorrow and fury. No cries rent the air, no outbursts of sentiment unfit for fighters of their stature. Yet within the stern decorum of their lamentation, in the exactitude of the mandated observances, lay an emotional profundity that surpassed superficial mourning. Even so, across the ensuing ages, tales of Sigismund's final defiance would rally innumerable defenders of the Imperium. The gash he carved into Abaddon haunted the despoiler for years onward, a persistent token that amid downfall, the Emperor's devotees could still demand a heavy toll. Far from waning through the absence of their progenitor, the Black Templars surged with renewed vigor. The ensuing High Marshal, the heir Sigismund had handpicked, would steer the chapter into bolder campaigns, their forces expanding as aspirants flocked to the mantle of the Emperor's champion. The line of inheritance had been settled well prior to the climactic clash. Sigismund, the master tactician, despite his mounting pious zeal, had named Bohemond as his designated successor, mentoring the rising champion to claim command at the appointed hour. Bohemond had internalized not only the strategic tenets and structural tenets steering the Black Templars, but also the doctrinal essence that infused those elements with purpose. He could never embody Sigismund, nor mirror the singular blend of martial excellence and visionary piety that marked the inaugural High Marshal. Still, he proved a fitting inheritor, one who grasped that his duty lay not in supplanting Sigismund, but in perpetuating his endeavors, to sustain the drive of a holy war ignited by a resolve beyond his own. I lingered on the eternal crusader, my duties unaltered by the departure of the figure whose exploits I had chiefly chronicled. High Marshals rose and faded, each contributing to the chapter's renown, each upholding the customs Sigismund had instituted. And I chronicled them without fail, measuring everyone against the benchmark of the original, deeming them all valiant combatants, yet none fully embodying the fierce resolve that propelled Sigismund. Over the centuries ahead, the saga of Sigismund's confrontation with Abaddon would circulate endlessly, adorned anew with every narration until it ascended to hallowed legend. Certain accounts depicted Sigismund vanquishing a score of Chaos Lords prior to challenging the despoiler. Others portrayed him maiming Abaddon so severely that the renegade required hauling to the Eye of Terror, barely sustaining his existence. Reality, as ever, blended the ordinary with the sublime. A seasoned fighter, past his peak yet steadfast in belief, confronting a foe who ought to have crushed him effortlessly, succeeding via prowess and piety to scar his adversary even in death. A modest triumph amid grand loss, yet triumph all the same. The High Marshal's blade was retrieved and bestowed upon Sigismund's heir, although no bearer would brandish it with the lethal elegance of its pioneer. His armor, ruined beyond restoration, found sanctuary in the eternal Crusader's reclusiam, a foundational artifact destined to motivate untold generations of Black Templars. And his form, once the rites were duly enacted, was consigned to the emptiness per ancient custom. The Emperor's champion merged once more with the cosmos from which humanity ultimately emerges, but the holy war he ignited endured without cessation. The Black Templars pressed on with their unending conflict, fanning out through the stars in armadas that delivered the Emperor's retribution to myriad planets. Their conviction, first sparked by Sigismund amid the grim shadows of the Horus heresy, flared more intensely with every era. As rival chapters stumbled or perished, as the Imperium weathered upheavals that imperiled its very fabric, the sons of Sigismund held firm to their calling. Combat without conclusion, loyalty without bounds, belief without doubt lingers even now, thousands of years following his demise, as I continue my duties on this venerable starship, my cybernetic framework preserved by successive waves of tech priests utterly ignorant of the individual I used to be. I stand as an antiquity, much like the relics housed in the vessel's sanctum, a sentient chronicle of an era faded into myth. Among the current crew of the Eternal Crusader, I alone retain memories of Sigismund in his authentic form, not the sanctified icon crafted by chapter lore, but the mortal fighter who reshaped himself into an instrument of war via sheer determination, tempering his devotion into an edge keener than forged metal. Over the eons, the Black Templars have undergone shifts, as everything inevitably does, Their ceremonies have adapted, their doctrines molded by the trials of innumerable campaigns, spanning the Imperium's expanse and farther still. Yet, at their heart, they endure as Sigismund envisioned, combatants who derive meaning from piety, who pursue conflict not for its own sake, but as an act of worship, who hold with ironclad certainty that existence is no realm of aimless fate and futile agony, but a forge where humanity's essence is refined and strengthened amid adversity. As fresh recruits enter the ranks, their training includes absorbing the account of Sigismund's last stand. They discover how the inaugural High Marshal, venerable beyond even Astarte's norms, confronted Horus's successor and inflicted harm upon him right up to his own collapse. Instruction emphasizes this as the pinnacle of Black Templar identity, not chasing triumph regardless of price, but holding firm in resistance to the last breath. In a cosmos so immense, teeming with humanity's foes in measureless numbers, tactical success might prove unattainable. Yet ethical triumph, the ascendancy of the indomitable soul against hopelessness and decay, lies ever attainable. This teaching comes alive not merely via recitation, but via ceremonial simulation. Novices are led to a secluded hold within the hull, where holographic arrays summon the clash between Sigismund and Abaddon. They observe the flurry of strikes, the injuries borne by each duelist, the climactic blows that claimed the High Marshal's life, yet left him unbroken. The depiction incorporates the mythic flourishes accumulated across ages, rendering it more parable than chronicle, more emblem than reality. Still, the essential verity persists. In his dying instance, Sigismund personified the archetype every Black Templar pursues: utter loyalty manifested in unyielding opposition against certain downfall. I have observed myriad Black Templars embody and perish by this principle. I have chronicled their exploits, safeguarded their identities in the chapter's vaults, beheld their efforts to match their progenitors' standard. Certain ones attained splendid renown, others perished obscurely on forgotten planets, but each, in their manner, advanced Sigismund's inheritance. The conviction that belief outlives mortality, that obligation endures beyond loss, that resolve elevates an ordinary soldier toward the sacred. Within my databanks endures the capture of Sigismund's parting declaration to Abaddon, that terse, resolute utterance summing up his essence. Not conquest, but resistance. Not martial dominance, but the relentless essence of humanity that spurns submission amid insurmountable forces. This very essence propels the Black Templars onward, fueling their perpetual holy war through a galaxy dimming further, increasingly antagonistic to the flame of human progress. Occasionally, in the serene intervals amid combats, as the eternal crusader plows the emptiness toward fresh strife, I ponder if Sigismund attained his quest in that ultimate duel. Not success. He was far too shrewd a combatant, even in his fervor, to imagine vanquishing chaos's herald in its bastion. But maybe fulfillment. The sealing of a cycle initiated when he first clad himself in the Emperor's champion black plate, distinguishing himself from his kin. Sigismund's existence traced a path of metamorphosis, from elite fighter to embodied icon, from loyal progeny to fervent holy warrior, from flesh and blood mortal to legendary figure. Every phase marked an intentional decision, a willful forfeiture of part of his mortal self for a loftier aim. By conclusion, scant traces survived of the man who once flanked Rogel Dorn. Solely the instrument persisted, sharpened to utmost perfection, awaiting fate's grasp for its ultimate deployment. And maybe therein lies Sigismund's genuine bequest. Beyond the order he established or the campaign he ignited, it is the paradigm he offered of total commitment to an ideal. In this era where assurance ranks as the scarcest resource, with the Imperium assailed externally by foes and internally by rot, such unwavering resolve proves both uplifting and daunting to witness. It grants a lucidity scarce encountered in this beleaguered realm. What the united Imperium of man can attain in 1,000 years, an existence free from uncertainty, from wavering, from remorse. The perpetual night presses onward across the cosmos, bearing the heirs of Sigismund into conflict after endless conflict. And I persist in observing, documenting, safeguarding the legacy of a fighter who ascended to myth, who demonstrated that belief could be shaped into an instrument of destruction rivaling the sharpest edge, who revealed that even amid loss, resistance could plant the roots of triumphs yet to come. In a cosmos besieged by shadows on every front, where humanity's foes swarm in numbers too vast to tally, where the emperor endures chained to a deteriorating throne of gold, such resistance might represent the sole barrier shielding mankind from oblivion. The resolute denial to submit, to bargain, to embrace downfall, the readiness to battle forth when optimism fades, when success proves unattainable, when demise looms inevitable. Not seeking acclaim, not chasing prizes, but because it aligns with righteousness, because it proves essential, because it stands as the sole path for any devoted follower of the emperor. Sigismund comprehended this reality a millennium prior to the Imperium's full realization. He perceived with the unclouded vision of unwavering devotion that humanity's path lay not in advancement or revelation, but in perseverance, in clinging steadfast against the advancing shadows, in warring not for gain, but simply to persist. From that insight, he remade himself into the ideal soldier for such an era, relentless, inflexible, unbroken. The Black Templars pay tribute to his remembrance not through mere oaths or ceremonies, but through actions. Every campaign they launch, every clash they engage, every success they claim, and every setback they weather, all contribute to the enduring edifice honoring their originator. The emperor's defender may have perished, but his essence endures in every soldier who, clad in ebony plate and wields the blade in his honor, who wages war devoid of expectation for ultimate conquest, but with the conviction that the struggle itself holds profound worth. In the bleak void of the distant tomorrow, amid ceaseless warfare, such conviction might emerge as the most precious endowment one could claim. And it formed Sigismund's ultimate bequest to the realm he defended across a millennium. The awareness that even confronting certain downfall, rebellion, constitutes a conquest in its essence, a conquest of the soul over desolation, of conviction over skepticism, of obligation over mortality. I, Recorder Module 3791 or 2, inscribe this account to ensure the reality persists beside the fable, so that successors may grasp not merely the heroic icon sculpted by chapter lore, but the individual who elected to embody a tool in devotion to his deity, who hammered his piety into a weapon that would surpass his fleeting flesh, who illustrated that, in an epic of gloom, it is not aspiration that upholds us, but intent, not cheer, but determination, not the vow of triumph, but the rejection of surrender. Sigismund, the emperor's defender, the ebony sentinel of first light, the inaugural high marshal, a combatant who existed without terror and departed without sorrow, whose inheritance lingers in the brotherhood he established and the holy war that echoes his title, who affirmed with his last unyielding exhale that devotion can surpass the grave. The heavens chill, the cosmos blazes, humanity's adversaries assemble for the ultimate onslaught against the remnants of the emperor's dream. Yet the Black Templars press the assault onward, upholding the banner first hoisted by Sigismund 10,000 years past. They cling to the doctrine he instilled in the shadowed hours following the siege of terror. They draw meaning from loyalty, power from piety, success from rebellion, for that embodies the ultimate verity. Sigismund knew it well. In an eternal strife against foes too numerous to measure, no isolated skirmish's result defines the whole. It is the resolve to engage that counts, to stand defiant against the abyss, to declare through sword and storm, bolter and spilled lifeblood, that mankind shall not fade silently into the perpetual void, but shall fury against it until the final light expires. Sigismund has passed, but the edge he tempered in the forge of his creed shall endure forever.